the screen. Try that one again. Hello, everyone. Just getting the screens in order there, and welcome. Yes, as Christine said, this is Reading Between the Lines, and our goal today is to talk about developing those very essential and important critical literacy skills in our respective ABE classrooms. And yeah, my name is John Trerotola, and as Christine said, not located in Minnesota. I might as well be. I'm in the DC area, and it's about as cold here or colder than it is, I'm sure, in Minneapolis right now. But yes, I am currently a GED, ELA, social studies teacher from the Fairfax County Public Schools. They have an adult education program, and something new, that's something I wasn't doing in Minnesota. I started my third year teaching at the Fairfax County Adult Detention Center, and definitely I've loved every minute of it. A new environment for sure for me, but one that has been very rewarding. And in the past, though, I see a few familiar names coming into the session. I was a GED teacher at Robbinsdale, the adult academic program. Was there with Christine for a number of years, and also an extremely rewarding experience there as well. So welcome, and definitely, yeah, feel free to chat, please, at any time that you want to comment on something, or most importantly, that idea that we are the best resources each other. And if we're talking about a strategy or a specific resource and you have some insight, or successes, challenges, that type of thing, please feel free to chat that out as well. I'm hoping at the end that we will have some time just to talk, so to speak, amongst ourselves about some of the things that we discussed today. And then, as I say, more importantly, definitely talk about how maybe you can apply something that we did talk about today, and then share some strategies and resources about critical literacy skills in your own classrooms. Thanks so much for attending. So before we begin, take a look, please. Look at these three texts on the right side. Which ones would you trust? Why and why not? Don't analyze too deeply. We're just going to spend a few seconds on this. Just go with your gut. Which one of these would you trust? Number two's there. Number twos, yeah, lots of number twos. That one and three, that one and three are a little problematic, and yeah, and really, two is probably the best. Ooh, someone said none. Yeah, it's all of them are have their own issues. Some a little bit more major than others. Of course, that first one, new study with no source. New study. What study is that? Where did it come from? That third one, that definitely, that first one, shows that idea of validity. That third one, anonymous posts. Quotes, definitely an opinion. That one is very straightforward. That second one, I threw that one in just to have something to think about in terms of a something coming from a source about their source. So this one, GED, and then data coming from GED. Probably legitimate, but always at kind of in the back of our mind, is there any potential bias there as well? Something we will be talking about later. Thank you for that. So when you're looking at those three texts, the takeaway from that really is asking yourself, and you probably were doing this, asking yourself, certain questions. And those questions are the basis of reading critically. Who created the source? For what purpose? What information is missing? Who benefits from this message? And of course, there are many others. These are the skills that we will be talking about today, for sure, in more detail here in just a few minutes. And also, if we're asking these questions, our students are asking them as well. And our learners do need to develop these skills when they are reading or confronted with all types of articles, blog posts, HSE test questions. That information highway, I always like that term, is a long one and a wide one. So just think about it's not just a task. Critical literacy isn't just extra, something you just kind of add in from time to time and move along. It is a critical skill for our students. And more specifically, our adult learners must navigate those complex tasks, evaluate sources, recognize perspectives and bias in not only academic type of context, but workplace, civic kind of context as well. And it's also essential to move our adult learner readers from passive readers into then more active readers. And by doing so, truly informing them, on past, present events, that connection, and then kind of at the end of the day, simply moving them away from believing everything they read. So much to discuss in so little time, as always. But here are some of our goals today that we hope to discuss. Some a little more detail, some we will briefly discuss. But of course, the slides are available after the session, and there's also a resource list that I did put together that has some of the resources that we discussed today, plus a few extra items as well. Hopefully, we can take just a quick peek at that at the end. But basically, we're going to define what critical literacy means, identify those skills for sure, and part of our discussion today is the idea of how social studies and related materials and texts can be used to teach critical literacy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. But focusing on a specific content type of text that will help us with these skills. Of course, there's plenty of other types of text that can be used, but for today, we're going to mainly focus on those social studies ones. And then at the end, we'll assess that variety of instructional strategies and hopefully formulate, if not together, but in your head or after the session, formulate a plan on how you can use some of the things that we talk about today in your own classroom, depending on your level of teaching and, of course, too, on your environment, whether it be online, hybrid, or an in-person classroom. I love this quote, and as many of you may know, my background is in social studies, and I found this one from Edmund Burke, goes back a few centuries, but it is applicable to today. To read without reflecting is like eating without digesting. Take just a second, please. I have a few sentence starters on the right-hand side, and just in our virtual discussion world, give me some thoughts on this one. This quote, is this something that resonates with you, and or what it means to you? Maybe you disagree with this quote, or maybe have some other thoughts regarding this quote. But any any thoughts? Feel free to chat those out just for as I say, just a minute. To read without reflecting. Nice. That's good. Thank you, Christy. That's a good one. I may not chew my food 20, but I sure reflect and interact on what I read. Yes, yeah. And think of this too, think of ourselves, as educators, think of our students as, learners, and just, we are, and yeah, lots of agreement with this one. Maybe just a couple others, and then we will, yeah, definitely. And consider this too, and we'll talk about this in just a few minutes, that when you are, introducing a specific critical literacy skill or talking about the reading process, throw this one up onto the screen or in the classroom and get your students doing the same thing with this one. Good, thank you. It'll be fun to read those. Take a look at those as they're coming across. But I think everyone is in agreement that, yeah, that we can't just read to read. Yeah, there has to be that next all-important step, and that's what we need to reflect on with our students as well. All right, we will move from that one. So critical literacy, yeah, critical. Keep using that term, and I know most of you are like familiar with the term, but yeah, that term literacy and then critical together, it does come together, as that idea of the ability to read text actively, question what is taken for granted. This next part too, recognizing power and perspective. I'm going to notice in some of the examples today, some of the text-dependent questions that I'm going to put up have to do with power and, who has power at a certain time, who does not. That's why social studies texts are so valuable in these type of skills. And then, of course, yeah, vocabulary, language, how that works in, how that affects point of view and bias and understanding of the text. And as I mentioned before, not just critical. This is not just a school classroom skill. Definitely a skill that our learners and all of us can take into the real world, and it will help us in workplace situations and just real world situations. And that last part, being a more informed member participation in society, super important considering all the things that are happening at the current time. On the right-hand side, we're going to come back to many of these. These are, and there are so many considerations when applying that critical lens to any reading. And we can't forget listening task. We'll talk about that too, that we are doing the same critical literary skills, whether we're reading something or whether we are listening to something. And looking at some of these all-important skills, identifying bias, comparing multiple sources, multiple perspectives. Also not forgetting visual and verbal information too. So as I say, we're going to come to these. There are so many. We'll focus in on a number of them and apply those to some concrete examples as we go along. So now that we have a better understanding of what critical literacy is, or just a basic understanding at this moment, why is it important? And the why part is just that, the amount and sources of information that are coming at all of us on a 24/7 basis. And I've just listed out, just a couple ways that we are all getting our information from, or a couple sources that we're getting our information from. And just for a second, and just throw it in the chat, where do you get your should say primarily, where do you get your news and information from in 2026? Yeah, just give everyone your thoughts. And it's kind of interesting too. And this would also be something interesting to do with your students, because then that will help you and me as teachers, think about, well, yeah, most of my students are getting their news and information from social media, or maybe they're going, old school, so to speak, and still relying on, maybe some hard copies of news sources. But it's interesting. And also, too, something else to think about, that idea of how AI is becoming now part of our real world, and how a lot of this information, no matter where it's coming from, is coming from or is generated by AI. And I just found that quick quote from Axios about the number of sources that are out there that are primarily written by AI. And I'm sure that number is growing every day. So as I mentioned before, the goal is, not to have students just believe everything they read, inside and outside of the classroom. And at any level, really, in any kind of classroom environment, These skills will hopefully make your students more confident readers and listeners because they're actually going to be thinking about the validity of what they are reading or listening to. And those then that teach any type of HSE, GED, high set, whatever it might be, as you know, and myself being a GED teacher, these are the skills that students need to have success on a GED or high set test, especially when it comes to that RLA's constructed response, and of course, many of the reading questions as well. It also too builds habits, and this is for everyone too, for reading something kind of under time pressure. There's so much out there, and we want to be able to read something and before something else pops onto the screen and absorb enough to make some important decisions about how valid, how invalid something may or may not be. Take a look at this chart just for a second. This is how many of you, many of your responses to where you're getting your news from. I would too, put in that idea of social media and some of the other ones as well. But this chart really validates where potentially, our students are getting their news from. This is just TikTok, but you see that age range there of 18 to 29, and not only the percentage, but then that increase in percentage in the last 4 or 5 years for sure. So something to think about. And and our goal then, with that in mind, and with some of these kind of preliminary thoughts in mind, where we're getting our news from, why these skills are important, our goal then is to give them, that would be our students, those skills to become more critical readers, listeners, and thinkers in this age of mass information. And not only that, there is that they are such a big part of those standards that are guiding ABE instruction. Of course, the CCRS. A little more on that in just a minute. TIFF, the ACES TIFF standards. I must admit I'm always guilty of not recognizing the connections, but I need to because in the actual ACES TIFF book, not just TIFF at a glance, there are a lot of sample activities and considerations for teaching about bias and critical thinking and other skills that we're going to discuss today. And then, of course, North Star, the digital literacy side, very, very important. There are assessments on information literacy, assessing the reliability of sources, synthesizing information from two or more sources, definitely part of critical literacy. So the big question is, how can we ensure that the critical literacy skills are being incorporated into our everyday class routines? The good news with that is that there are many strategies and resources, and our goal today is to explore some of them and share with each other some of those strategies and resources that you are using. And as I mentioned a little earlier, going to show really how social studies related resources, texts, that type of thing, are a perfect support for critical literacy skills. They're ideal. Primary sources, news articles, speeches, historical accounts, all good. They give students that real world, persuasive, they're perspective driven, and take a look at some of the other considerations as well. That idea that they are rich in argument. Oftentimes they are biased, so that does give the students practice then to recognize bias. A lot of them require inferences, in whether in current times or in historical context, and we'll talk about that one here in just a minute. Also brings that real world experience as well. Students can bring their own experiences and relate that somehow to whatever text is being listened to or read. And also too at the end, it does support, as I mentioned a little earlier, those RLA and social studies goals, and of course connect with the standards as well. So for today, you're going to see a lot of things that are related to social studies, but again, there are plenty of other content resources out there that these skills and strategies can certainly apply to. So before we focus on those skills and those resources, and just thought of one thing too on the resources before we take a look at some of these reading skills a little closer, is that there are so many resources out there, and if some of the resources are not accessible based on your classroom, one room schoolhouse, a correctional facility. I know that one well. That a lot of digital resources to provide students are not readily accessible for sure. Just remember, you and I have done. I've gone old school and can use, magazines, news magazines, newspapers, to achieve the same goals. Looking at articles, looking at their credibility, looking for bias, and so on. The editorial section of a hard copy newspaper will be all you need to practice or to have students practice these skills for sure. So let's take a look before we get into those. Let's take a look at just those reading skills that we all practice with our learners, and kind of making that shift or helping them shift from more passive readers into more active readers. And many of these, that kind of, pre-reading, during reading, post-reading, before reading, introducing the topic, maybe doing a KWL chart, depending on what the topic is of the day, previewing the text, that initial glance can go a long way, looking at headings, subheadings, pictures, graphs, starting that predicting process of what this text is potentially going to be about. Vocabulary, of course. Vocabulary, those pre-taught words versus ones to discuss and define in context. And then those during reading strategies. And we're going to talk about, kind of how big, so to speak, the texts have to be, or how small they can be to achieve our goals. But, for those lengthier texts, breaking it up into chunks, highlighters, simple annotations, question marks, something I don't understand, exclamation point, this is a big idea, can be as simple as that. And then also all of those templates. I know we all have our favorite templates, the graphic organizers, to chart certain skills. Some work so much better with an organizer, claims, reason, evidence, fact versus opinion. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then, of course, having those multiple readings for all learners, and multiple readings at all levels. And some of the ESL classes I've taught, of course, we do multiple readings. And 2, 3, 4 times, and take various approaches to it. But in my GED classes now, doing multiple readings as well. One is not enough, and the more, the better, to help with that comprehension. And then at the end, that whole idea of being critical readers by questioning what is being read and then reflecting on what was just read. That is our point today that we do want to take away, and not just critical kind of readers after, but also during. That kind of, it's like that paragraph said this. I'm not sure if I need more. Do I need less? The information is not there. So having that process, during reading, and then at the end, really reflecting on that. So those last two, of course, are a perfect transition as we now start to explore those specific critical literacy skills and strategies. And before we do so, one quick reminder. And you might be thinking this at this point. It's like, yeah, text. What kind of text? How long should the text be? For those that are HSE teachers, we're talking, GED type, 4 or 5 paragraphs in some of the materials, and then perhaps at the pre-GED, ESL level, shorter texts. But a good reminder is that critical reading doesn't require long texts. Just scaffold up to longer texts as students become more confident. But even just one quote, headline, something like that can spark deep analysis. And I've put down just a few examples here that you can take a look at, where we simply are, writing, studies show adults learn best online, and then simply asking, do we trust it? Kind of like we did at the beginning. And then a little more questioning, what do you need to know first? So this is getting students to start thinking about asking for the source, asking for evidence, asking for more details. That next one, yeah, voter turnout increased last year. Voting laws are unfair. Kind of a classic fact versus opinion. And again, getting students thinking about, something may look like a fact when in fact it is just an opinion. And then also too, that idea of having students start to think about, who says something, where they're coming from really does matter. What is the goal of the speaker in certain situations? So that first one goes to that idea of credibility, and then that second one, fact versus opinion, and that third example there is related to that skill of author and audience, purpose, and sourcing. So keep that in mind. And and as Christine just saw the chat there for a second, Christine mentioned good warm-ups, and that's exactly what these are meant to be. So speaking of a quote, this is a short quote activity that is ideal for adult learners, or all learners, but it would fit well with our adult learners. It's powerful, it's accessible, it's historically grounded, and it's a quote too that, like many quotes from history, you don't need to explain everything first. And explain meaning, the context of everything. Some you do, and depends on your, situation and your, what you're talking about in class. Sometimes, one quote without a lot of background will work. Often, though, you might have a larger discussion, a lesson, a unit on bigger topics, more content related, civil rights leaders, slavery, that type of thing. And I mentioned those two because this quote ties in with those types of topics. And yeah, feel free to use this one in your own class. We're just going to look through it here in just a second. Use this one, use as a framework. Again, this would be a good warm-up activity to get students thinking critically for sure. And, since there's not a shortage of past and present quotes of this nature, you'll have no trouble finding one or two. And also, too, you see, I've listed out some of the goals that one quote, just one single quote, can bring, and also the alignment with many of the standards as well, just from one quote. So here it is. Let's walk through this one and give me your thoughts, please. And any of these things, as I mentioned, give me your thoughts, how you would apply it, your way, depending on your level, how this would work in your classroom. But here's the quote: "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." It's a quote from Frederick Douglass. And as you say, this, as I mentioned a little earlier, this quote, of course, you may want to talk about context, Frederick Douglass, who Frederick Douglass was, where he fits in to history and the historical narrative. But just the quote itself is powerful enough where you can then take it to the next step and start breaking it down with that critical lens. So as you'll see here, as with many of my examples today, I have broken them down by level, but these are, certainly interchangeable based on your classroom environment. They can be leveled up, they can be leveled down. Yeah, you might see some of the questions and say, oh yeah, well, we're going to get to that at some point with my students, or oh, my students, yeah, this would be too easy for my students. But again, it's more of a framework and considerations for using some of these strategies. So, for example, on the ESL side, reading the quote, and as you see some of the questions there, who is saying it, starting to kind of get a little deeper. What does the word free mean? Is the author talking about reading or something more? So, kind of taking it to that next level. And then pre-GED HSE side, definitely a little bit more, yeah, a little bit more. Why is reading important? What claim is and again, it's one quote, but then, starting to get that vocabulary out there, when someone is making a powerful statement, it's called a claim, and we'll be talking about that later type of thing. So using some of that vocabulary of critical literacy early on for sure. And also, too, you'll see at the bottom, and you'll see kind of throughout a few of my examples that I do pop in a few sentence frames. Definitely, as I say, I'm sure you all have your favorite sentence frame resources, but no matter what the resource or where you're getting the frames from or just making them up yourselves, they are definitely a powerful support for our students. And I did put a few sentence frame charts into the resource folder that you can look at a little bit later. But finishing up with this quote activity, here are, at that GED, HSE level, definitely a little more deeper questions, and definitely more of that inferencing that has to come in. Then also, some historical context, who had access to education at that time, definitely a time then to talk about the time period, perhaps. And then that third question, one I really like, how does this quote challenge systems of power? And that, that can definitely be asked at multiple levels, but yeah, that idea of challenging systems of power and what is this person's context and situation? Why would he say this at a certain time in history? And then the writing prompt, yeah, gets a little close to, but definitely can be used by all, and definitely adaptable for sure. But that idea of, do you agree and not just agreeing, those that teach GED, not just agreeing with a claim, but also using evidence to support an answer. So think about that. And then also just at all levels, a quick write idea over there about information itself. And I really like this writing prompt. I've given this one to my students, and the responses are amazing about who controls information, and how are we getting it, and how is it being used in society in different contexts and ways, and depending on who you are and where you are. So yeah, definitely think about that one as just a writing prompt, and at the end of the day, they're kind of basically the outcomes, of not only the entire quote activity, but especially that last question as well. So let's get a little more detailed. Let's get a little bit more detailed with basically two ways of introducing and reinforcing critical literacy skills in our respective classrooms. So, the first way, we're going to explore together some simple ways that we can incorporate these skills into our everyday class routines. And wanted to emphasize again that the examples, the texts that you're going to see, the questions, the potential activities, they'll be short, but consider them as a starting point to build your own activities. So yeah, these are just examples and our starting point. But yeah, we all have our resources, places where we get text from, questions that we've used in the past that work for us. But these, as I say, I kind of use them as a starting point to think about, that effort to incorporate these skills into our routines. And then second, we're going to look at a few sites, so to speak, ready-made sites like Common Lit, that can not only be filtered or leveled texts, but can also be filtered by different critical literacy skills. So, we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time ourselves. We can go to sites like this and find rich texts that are applicable to our students' lives, social studies, current events, whatever it might be. But then, yeah, that all important being able to level them to our students' reading skills and reading levels, and then also those critical literacy skills as well. I want something on making inferences, and it needs to be at the eighth grade level. So we'll look at a few of those sites. Many of them will probably be familiar, but we'll if we have time, take a look at a couple of them in more detail and what they have to offer. So as we've been talking about, as we've seen, just kind of as a big overview, there are so many critical literacy skills out there to get our students more engaged, with information. But for today, we're going to focus on these, and yeah, there are many more out there. Identifying main idea, identifying text structure, word choice, tone, and some of those skills are kind of incorporated into these skills as well. But let's look at these in detail with some text, some questions, some potential activities that you may be able to use. So first one, identifying authors, audience, and purpose. That idea of students identifying, who wrote the text, who is it for, why was it written, and yeah, that whole idea of author's purpose, and that for not only all levels of learners, this is so beneficial for to really to get that explicit focus on intent. Why was something written? Recognizing point of view and bias. Yeah, students notice opinions. They notice that loaded language, one-sided perspectives. And this is where social studies texts, come into play so well, is that, a lot of texts, social studies related type texts are, relatively not neutral and often have either explicit or implicit bias in them, especially when we're talking about causes of certain things or perspectives on certain historical events. So yeah, social studies texts are a perfect fit with this skill. Facts and opinions. Students identifying, verifiable facts versus beliefs or claims. Yeah, again, that idea of, argument analysis and evidence-based writing, and then just really just that simple recognition of, what is a fact and what is an opinion. And so many things, as I mentioned a little earlier, so many claims look like they're facts, but if you really think about them, can they be verified? And that's what we want our students to start thinking about as well. Claims, reasons, and evidence. Yeah, this is this out of these are all very, very important, but this one, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. Yeah, claims are coming at all of us, our students, all the time. And it's that idea of someone's making that strong opinion statement, but is it being backed up by reasons? And then more importantly, is it being backed up by evidence as well? Inferences, using context clues, background knowledge to infer meaning. It's Texts are all often written, with that are often written without implicit or explicit details. They are implicit details, and that practice of inferencing is a critical one for sure. Comparing multiple sources, different texts on the same events. Why is this important? Is that really critical literacy requires students, to corroborate sources, not just trust one text. We'll talk about this more in a general way, and then we'll go to a site, as I say, to that. This is the main focus of that site, to encourage what they call lateral reading. Yeah, again, reading one thing on a topic, but then not just stopping there, but then finding one or two or multiple types of sources to corroborate the information that is being given. And then connecting. We connect text to civic and real world issues. And as I say, social studies texts aren't just something from the past. These are those community, workplace type of documents, reading materials, something like that will help our students in not only school, but in the community as well. So as you are looking at these skills, you'll want to explain them before applying them to texts, needing that all-important scaffolded approach, kind of what we're doing today a little bit, kind of we're focusing kind of more on the small end of things or the more brief end of things, but then thinking about, well, how can this strategy, how can this resource be built into something larger? So that is something you can certainly do on your own after we review some of these at the general level. And as I do in my own teaching, it's recommended to me, basically start practicing just one skill with one text set. I think early on I was like, oh, I think I'm going to try to incorporate all these into one text. What's the bias? What's the inference? What's the purpose? What's something a fact and something an opinion? Too many, and I learned definitely to step back and find some rich text for students to read, and then focus, really do a deep focus or a deep dive into a particular skill, and as students become more confident. With longer reading tasks and activities, then of course more skills can be incorporated into one piece of text. And at the side, I mentioned before, the connection with those standards, especially the CCRS. I've just listed out a few of them, kind of the ones that really high impact standards that with critical literacy go hand in hand, but also any critical literacy skill will hit so many other substandards, depending, on your level and your goal for your instruction. Our first skill, identify author, audience, and purpose. And for this skill, always a good way to introduce this skill is by reminding students every text is written by someone for someone for a reason. I use that one. I don't know where I got that one from, but I think I even write it up on the board or have it on a slide for my students just to think about. It's kind of obvious, but then it's just good to have it a reminder. And so that is kind of a good way to introduce this critical literacy skill. And for these examples, there'll be 7 of these examples. These are the text examples on the left-hand side. They're short passages and again can be longer passages, but really it is examples, perhaps, pulled out of a larger piece of reading, or perhaps it's something after you've talked about a topic that's related to whatever text it might be, a person, place, or event that can be used. But for today, yeah, we'll just see these kind of shorter social studies related paragraphs to give you, yeah, give you hopefully some ideas of general ways to incorporate these and these other skills that we're going to review here throughout today into your own room. And also too, you'll see some guiding questions. I again did a quick leveling. Those can be changed, and an additional activity to consider. These are all starting points, and you can, yeah, use these general social studies texts like these, or actual texts from a primary source, perhaps maybe for a little bit more advanced study. But yeah, just these kind of general overview about something, from past or present history to get students started for sure. So let's get started with this, and yeah, just take a look at the text on the left-hand side. Take a few seconds just to scan through that. And why this text works. This is something about the women's right movement, early women's right movement, and why this one works is that it can connect then with other rights movements in history or at the current time as well. So it's really, connecting the past with the present. And take a look at at these guiding questions. And yeah, each one, again, is close to perhaps a certain level, but can be interchanged and used for other levels as well. But yeah, is the author asking for change? Why does the author mention certain things? And then again, that last question about power as well. And here's just a simple activity. This can be expanded, but a starting point, students rank audiences from most important to least important, and then explaining their reasoning. So, here is some text. Here is what someone is trying to do in this case, in terms of rights. How is the audience? Who is the most important to hear this? Who's the least important? Maybe they're all important. Maybe some are more important than others. But starting to have students think about, here is something, here is a purpose for writing or speaking, and who is benefiting from it, who is not benefiting from it, who is being left out. So basically, kind of ranking the audience. Another activity is this whole idea that students can also highlight words. I have my students do this in making that connection then about how does language show purpose, certain word choice, strong words, connotations, versus, strong versus weaker words to get their point, the writer's point across. So having students go through text and recognize those type of vocabulary. Next, we have recognizing point of view and bias. And this is, yeah, take just a minute and take a look at this text. This is based on westward expansion, and this is a really good historical topic to explore point of view and bias more. The idea of westward expansion, on one hand, supporters of westward expansion, and then on the other hand, indigenous peoples experienced expansion differently. And yeah, there's so much more to this text that can be presented, but definitely, who supports it, what words describe expansion as positive and negative, getting into that vocabulary again, and then connecting it to today. How might history still affect communities today? Is, getting that point of view, has it changed? Is it the same? And so, as an activity, perhaps this whole idea of missing perspective, and when we have events in history, you can be written by individuals from various from various points of view. But then, who has it been written by? Then what about someone else who would be writing this? And in this case here, what might a child, a woman, or an indigenous elder say about expansion, and others as well? So, kind of taking, the those that are in the reading, where it's coming from, who's involved, but then thinking about, yeah, if someone else was experiencing this, how would they interpret it? What would their point of view be as they go along? Back from opinion. Back from opinion that, yeah, this I took a text from the Great Depression, that idea that what is provable versus belief based, and yeah, that what the depression is or was, factually, and then we have that kind of clue word there. Some people believed the depression, and that can be discussed with students. Again, word choice to identify opinion versus fact, and yeah, building the questions from there. Why might people have different opinions about the same event? And that last question too can be applied to anything in terms of reading in history. Why is it important to separate facts from opinions in history? Why is it important to do that? Yeah, we got to know what they are, but why is it important to do that? And I like this activity. I've done this one in my classroom, is that have students rewrite one opinion sentence to make it more factual, or explain why it cannot be a fact, and then debrief with that all important question: can all opinions become facts? Why or why not? And like I do in my classroom, and you do as well, I'm sure, emphasizing the idea that, opinions are not wrong. Opinions aren't bad. We all have them, but building on that, and emphasizing the idea that in order for them to become stronger, that reasons and evidence are necessary to make it factual, perhaps. And also to that idea that just because there's evidence doesn't mean it's good evidence, but that we can discuss later. All right. Speaking of evidence, analyzing claims, reason, and evidence. When it comes to this skill, definitely, yeah, definitely clarifying the differences between evidence, reasons, claims, getting back to that vocabulary of critical literacy. Of course, tying this in with the GED extended response, which evidence best supports the claim. But as a quick warm-up activity to introduce this skill, this idea of just a short, this is a more of a real world type of example in the text about government investing in roads and bridges, officials pointing out certain things, critics questioning, and so on. And even in this brief text here, having students identify, what's a claim? Is there a reason? Is there any evidence? Just to start with. And then, of course, the evaluation of all that can come later, but just an idea of getting used to looking for more than just claims and just opinions. And that activity that I mentioned here is just that. I always have students, three different highlighters. Either we do it together or have them do it on their own with text, and highlighting the claim in yellow, reasons in green, and evidence in red, just to start getting that structure of arguments, which will help them then read arguments, and then also help them ultimately write arguments as well. And I'm constantly modeling this for sure, as I'm sure you are when talking about claims, reasons, and evidence. And organizers are perfect for this. And not everything has to be written by students. I use discussion circles, structured academic controversies where students read something, get guided questions, and then basically must defend their position, citing reasons and evidence. So it's definitely a reading task, but can also be a speaking and listening task for sure. I don't know about you, but teaching inferences is one of those more challenging reading skills. Implicit details versus explicit, and then just explaining exactly what an inference is. It's not just a guess out of the blue, but it's a logical guess, an educated guess, whatever we want to call it. And this one, yeah, this is just a quick text on the Industrial Revolution, but with a lot of inferences that can be done just with this short paragraph, and starting with what's going on in this paragraph. But that second question, what can you infer about family life at this time? Is great or not so great? And who had the power to change working conditions? It doesn't say that in here, but students can infer through discussion. And something I've used quite a bit lately with inferences is giving students text, whatever it may be, and then a chart that has the evidence from the text in it, and then having them have to make an inference. Or can be done vice versa, giving students an inference column, and then they have to go back into the text and find that corresponding evidence that supports that inference. And trying to connect again, past, present, would this situation be legal today? A good quick write, perhaps, or discussion topic. Finally, or not finally, we still have our comparing multiple sources. Those multiple sources of, in this case, we have a historical overview of the civil rights movement and a personal perspective. So definitely two sources on the same event or a similar event. And yeah, what do they have in common? Why might they be different? And then this is kind of the takeaway from any time we compare multiple sources. How does reading multiple texts change your understanding? And in this case, maybe about the civil rights movement or about some other event, some other past or present event. And for this, yeah, Venn diagrams are all of our friends for sure, showing those similarities and differences. They're most helpful when comparing and contrasting those causes of certain events in history, or same thing as I just mentioned, an event that's currently happening for sure. And then finally, connecting text to civic and real world issues. And yeah, not everything, as I mentioned a little earlier, has to be some kind of historical text. It is one that you can use documents that our students are working with in their daily lives. In this case, we're talking about education. This one does have a little more of a historical context, but taking this, breaking this one down in its meaning, but then yeah, that idea, especially in the activity. In the past, education helped individuals, but then making that connection with the present, education helps individuals. And that is, yeah, what kind of at the end, what has changed, what has stayed the same is, yeah, that most important question to ask. We don't want to forget that visuals and verbals, that listening, speaking type of things, they need the critical eye and ear as well. And what I've done here, and yeah, all of the sites I mention on for today are live, and you can certainly come back to these. But just a few suggestions. The idea of charts, graphs, other data set critical literacy is not just a reading skill. Reading Anchor 7, that one sticks always in my head about integrating and evaluating visual information. So charts are a good way. And that's the TISTA website. I just found that one, I think, last year, but it has every chart imaginable that you can create questions from. Photographs, paintings, always a good way to get those visual skills going. Yeah, National Archives has a plethora of photographs that can go a long way. And then those political editorial cartoons, especially those teaching GED, HSE classes, as I know and you know, that those editorial political cartoons show up on the social studies GED test. This Counterpoint site has examples, of course, newspapers, magazines have them as well, with those guiding questions that help students figure out what is being what is being said from something that is a visual. Also listening as well. Yeah, those listening tasks are essential to critical literacy, and speech excerpts. I have used I think most of these. Yeah, FDR's December 7th, MLK's I Have a Dream speech excerpts, from these. Don't have to listen to the whole speech. RFK's remarks upon the assassination of MLK. That one's super powerful, and would highly recommend that to as a way to talk about point of view and tone and perspective, and context, historical context, and there are others here as well. So, and chat out, please. Yeah, chat out for both of these. If you have sites where you're getting visuals, charts, graphs, and or verbal speeches, if you have some favorite sites of your own that can help us all find those kind of resources, that would be great. And with those listening tasks, who wrote this? Who wrote this speech? I'm listening to it, but who's the audience? What is the purpose? Is the speaker trying to inform us, persuade us, or justify, and so on. Yeah. So take a look, please, at this. They're a little blurry, but a few of the examples today are in the resource folder in terms of sentence frames, some organizers, that type of thing, and the frames, that historical thinking chart. There's a lot going on that one. I did put that one into the resource folder, and it's much more clear. But yeah, just kind of looking at it quickly here, here are the skills, sourcing, where is something coming from, cooperation, that close reading, and also many questions that can be asked, many prompts as well that can be used or adapted to meet your needs. And sentence frames, I use them. Yeah, I use them all the time as those temporary scaffolds, and fade them out as students gain more confidence. Great for starters for those academic discussions as well, and definitely use some of those in terms of graphic organizers as well. I'm sure you all have your favorites, and I have my favorites, but it is just they're important, so important to use to make the thinking visible, whether it be anchor charts, claim evidence, bias, terms, vocabulary, whatever it might be. As I mentioned earlier, we don't need to do everything ourselves. Here are a few sites that there are some ready-made texts that can be adapted and leveled, and then filtered by those critical literacy skills. And here are just sites that I use, and some of the activities I've used in the past. Common Lit there's an excellent article on Ruby Bridges that focuses on evidence in its question set. ReadWorks last fall, how Thanksgiving is also a day of mourning, and it was an inference type of questioning passage. This this idea of listening, listen wise. I know you have to pay now for listening, listen wise, but through the free trial, you can develop those students' critical listening skills by listening to podcasts and recognizing bias and corroboration and evaluating information and evidence from those listening passages. The Stossel in the Classroom, I do encourage everyone to take a look at that one. This is a new site I just came across last year, and it is basically videos that have or show both sides of an issue, and then guiding questions about evaluating the evidence that's presented. So if you're looking for something that's a little less text, heavy on the text, and more on the visual, definitely check out Stossel in the Classroom. Free and totally open. And finally, civics online reasoning. I don't think we have a lot of time today to look at that one, but one of my favorite, it is the gold mine of critical literacy resources. It does have everything you need in terms of looking at excerpts of various events in history with guiding questions that focus in on all of the reading skills that we've been talking about today. And also, too, Civic Online Reasoning has just that, an entire curriculum that focuses on evaluating online sources. And as I mentioned a little earlier when we were talking about corroboration, their whole basis for their curriculum is something called lateral reading. And they have already provided us with then multiple texts on one certain topic, and then with the idea of having students read those and what are the texts agreeing with each other, disagreeing, what are they missing, how are they alike, how are they different. So definitely Civic Online Reasoning is one of my go-to sources. It used to be called Stanford History Education Group, but they updated their name with their new curriculum, and definitely look at that as well. Free, and all you need to do is register. Real world texts, real world texts, are there for our students as well. Those government and civics texts, that is, just anything that comes from that's government related and will help students. Who's writing this? Should I believe this? Local national news articles comparing again one headline from two. It can just be two headlines, or it can be two longer articles. Protest signs and slogans. That's always a fun way to get students thinking about messaging and where is it coming from and how does the person want us to respond. Definitely applicable to many things that are happening currently. And those social media posts, whose voices are missing. We talked about that earlier, that since our students and many of us are getting our news and information from social media, asking those all-important questions. And in the middle, I put just a few other sources to consider as well for finding kind of that ready-made, either real-world text or ones that definitely kind of has that social studies side to them, where students can use those to practice these skills. At the end, our best resource is each other. And I think for our purposes today and time, always goes by so quickly. Just use this few minutes. We'll start to wrap up here, but use these few minutes to chat out. Our best resources are each other always, and the reminder of, we went through many strategies, many resources, many texts today. Choose a few. Don't need to incorporate them all immediately or a short amount of time. Choose a few and get comfortable with those. But maybe you can, in our remaining minutes, think about critical literacy skills, the ones we talked about, other ones, successes and challenges if you've had, maybe a resource we use. It's like, oh yeah, I've used Common Lit, or when I'm trying to talk about bias, I have done this, and it works, or I rely on this source to help me with that skill. And then at the end of the day, yeah, just any other resources, I have the resource list, but my list is certainly not not one that can certainly be added to, and I keep adding to it, and value your additions as well all the time. So to recap, think about this general framework when incorporating those critical literacy skills into your respective classrooms. Basically, introduce learners to the source. What do you notice? No major questions right away, just those kind of warm-up questions. And then that process of reading, looking, and or listening to the source with that critical eye. Again, just kind of those guiding questions to start building those skills. Where did it come from? Is there anything unique? What is it? What is this source? And then, yeah, to start making that bridge into those higher level critical literacy skills. Yeah, kind of going beyond the words or that you heard or that you read. What's the main idea? What is the purpose? What is the significance of this source? Why is it important? So just the idea that, critical literacy is essential for academic success, civic participation, workplace communications as well. Social studies texts, hopefully you've seen today that those are a good starting point for that deeper thinking. And, with structured strategies, all learners can definitely master those higher level reading skills and become more critical thinkers. And it also connects our learners to their own experiences as well. And that's so important for our students in our classroom discussions. And also to multiple perspectives that, yeah, not when we're comparing texts, we're not only comparing the validity of texts, but we're also looking at comparing those multiple perspectives and questioning those and going a little bit deeper into, why and how and when did someone say something or think a certain way. So much out there floating in the clouds. Definitely the Atlas Online Resource Library is there for you. Many of the resources we talked about today are there. Christine and I and Katrina tomorrow will be join us tomorrow morning for the conversation by the copier. We'll talk a little bit more about the online resource library in all our respective areas. And also, too, something else I want to mention, I'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow. I've been involved with a wonderful group of adult educators, Christine being one of them, university researchers, digital experts, to create a curriculum called Cilia T. And we're going to be hearing a lot about this in the coming months for sure. It will be open to the public very shortly. But basically, it's a 16 module curriculum that integrates history, civics, academic English proficiency, digital skills, all into one curriculum. And the basis for it is to and or goal is to enhance students critical literacy skills. So definitely the website, check out the website please on that. And as I say, you're going to be hearing a lot about it, and it's very near and dear to me, and I can't recommend it enough. So conclude, as we conclude, a final reminder. So instead of asking, what does the text say? Ask, why does the text exist, and who benefits from it? And this and many other ways of doing this, one single question, one single change in a question can activate that critical literacy instantly. So take that one, please. Think about that one. And as we conclude, I appreciate your attendance today for sure. I see some familiar names out there. Hello to everyone that from the past and present time, and And definitely, yeah, definitely feel free to contact me, even though I'm not in the state. I'm still involved and appreciate being involved back in Minnesota with all things that Atlas has to offer, etc. And here's my email address. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, many questions, comments, thoughts, other resources. I appreciate those, and or something you think that we should put out to the larger community. Definitely send those over to me, and I'll be glad to get those out. So, thank you again, everyone. Thank you again.